Rohit, thank you very much for coming on with us. We're very impressed with your company and with the product, which we are both happily wearing.
Very cool. That's
Couples
amazing.
who play together, stay together.
Apparently. We've managed 31 years so far. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's
Can I
amazing.
just start off by saying that this is not a medical device. This is not for diabetics. This is purely for us to find out what is going on in our body. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Well, we live in a country where diabetes is probably more prevalent even than any other country in the world. And that's caused partly by the culture here and evolution of the people here who would have had a very fat-based diet all through evolution in the desert, living off camels, etc. And now, of course, they've got access to all of the sweet things in the world. Indeed, every other shop on the high street here is selling sweets. And not surprisingly, a lot of people are now obese or diabetic or both. We would like to help in that we are residents here and a lot of our communities here. We'd love to be able to give best practice. And that's why we are experimenting on ourselves to see what best practice we can pass on. And of course, one way we can get best practice is if we really like Ultrahuman, then we recommend Ultrahuman to others because then they get firsthand insights into what's happening in their bodies.
I think I met a doctor, performance scientist and a doctor a few weeks back in Singapore, and he was conducting a few studies on ketogenic diets. And he told me something which was very, very counterintuitive. He said, like, long-term keto diets lead to type 2 diabetes. And I was like, why would that happen? Like, I mean, doesn't sound right. He was like, no, it's actually right, because what happens is once you are on ketogenic diets for extremely long periods of time, and the body works in a way that it uses the principle of use it or lose it, right? So if you don't need so much insulin, it will not make so much of insulin. And what happens is that after, let's say, 2 years of ketogenic diet, somebody starts consuming sugars. The body is like, oh, where is this sugar coming from? Like, I have never seen sugar, like so much sugar in my life, because the body only knows the last 2 years body, right? So it has some sort of recency effect.
That's very interesting, and you're already adding to my data bank of knowledge. I'm a performance athlete, an age group performance athlete, and Caroline too runs ultra marathons.
Wow.
Her audience is mostly ladies who would who need to understand that there is opportunity and possibility in every age of life going forward.
Yeah, because there are phases to everybody's lives, and so when you move into another phase, your body does different things. And post-menopause women tend to put on weight, and so we're combating this issue as one of the things that.
Yeah. So you're looking at two audiences with us, rather. Obviously, mine is very small relative to the Instagram following that Caroline enjoys, but mine is athletes, people who want to maximize human potential in terms of competition performance.
Okay, so this is a great question. So, and I think this has evolved for us as well as a platform, because we have been also trying to work with professional athletes over the last few months and almost a year plus now. So what we realize is that there are two facets of this, right? One core facet of an athlete's life is, you can say, game performance, which is when you're in the game, how do you make the most out of your fueling patterns, right? Glucose, interestingly, is a zone 3 fuel, right? Zone 2 to zone 3 transition fuel. So when you actually are doing an intense activity, and let's say in soccer match, almost 60% of the fueling would be either lactic acid or zone 3, right?
Yeah.
So, and a little bit of it is, depending on fat adaptation, it is ketogenic as well, or it is fat based as well. But most athletes actually are, because they have low body fat percentage, they would want to use a lot of lactic acid. And they would want to use a lot of their glycogen stores as well. So that being in, think of these as fuel cells, right, in the body. At the very basic, glucose data can actually tell you during your event, your game, during a performance sport, how your glucose is trending, can actually tell you that where your crashes are happening. And these crashes lead to dip in your performance, right? And the ideal profile of an athlete is that their glucose should always be either flat, trending upwards, or should have a very minor dip, one of these three, right? So you shouldn't go beyond, let's say, -5% of a dip during the session. So why is that important? Because glucose is not just physical performance, it's also cognitive performance. A easy way to understand this is you chug in a little bit of sugar and then you have brain fog. Why? Because you're sort of like exposed to a glucose spike, or a glucose spike leading to an insulin spike leading to a brain fog, right? This is something similar that happens at an accentuated pace for athletes essentially, right? So which is basically, if they don't fuel well from a glucose perspective, they will suffer cognitively as well as from a physical performance perspective. Now, this is one aspect of it. The other aspect is within the first bucket is the fact that most fueling patterns are optimized for fueling at the beginning of an event, right? Which is, you fuel, but then you get the peak at the beginning. But most deciders, usually, let's say if you're playing a soccer match, the decider is pretty much at the end. So you have the least cognitive performance at the end where you need the most. So if you have stable glucose levels, you will be able to maintain a stable cognitive performance. So that's the other aspect of, you can say, using glucose as a fuel. Now, cyclists, for example, might want to use it more like a physical performance fuel, not as much like a cognitive performance fuel. If you were talking about track and field athletes, they would still want to use it like a physical performance fuel. If it's a soccer match, people would want to use it like a physical plus, you can say, a cognitive performance tool for their event. So that's how it's emerging. Look at the likes of Eliud Kipchoge, Rafael Nadal. All of these folks are now using glucose to fuel their performance now for the similar reasons. So that's the first use case. Over the last 1 year, something that we have discovered with our athletes turned out to be extremely unique. We always think that, oh, athletes are extremely fit metabolically. And when we got them on our platform and we started doing long range studies with them, what we realized is that insulin is a problem, obviously, for sedentary individuals. But glucose dysfunction, insulin is also a problem for athletes because of the way they are using their body. There's also a health problem that they need to solve, because athletes don't just want to perform for 10, 15, 20 years. Now athletes want to perform for 30 years or more. So there is this whole era of athlete longevity that's actually emerging, which is that as I age, I want to get better at certain aspects of my sports, as well as I want to continue playing my sport, right? So because of this, what happens is, because athletes use their insulin profiles quite a fair bit. Like one track and field athlete had an insulin profile of a diabetic because they were so stimulated because of stress, right? But because the insulin was so high, their glucose levels would never spike and they would almost have like a flat curve. But the reality is that the variability was pretty high, and it won't show up as a disorder today. But 10 years from now, it might actually become a disorder, given the fact that insulin is anabolic in nature. So I think a lot of athletes have a similar, you can say, health crisis that they have to actually address to, apart from performance, if they want to keep performing in the future. So there are a lot of angles to look at this science, which is like, there is science around like variability of glucose leading to variability of insulin, leading to oxidative stress, which reduces their recovery time, reduces their overall recovery frequency. The other one is basically around their overall insulin sensitivity becoming lower. So suddenly, if they become less active, let's say after 20 years of performance, they suddenly become diabetic or they suddenly become obese. So that is something that athletes would want to avoid, because they're not just performing for like 20 years of their life, and they want to live a good life after that as well, right? So I think those are the two large aspects: zone 3 as a fuel, cognitive and physical, and second is athlete longevity.
Mohit, that was really comprehensive and very interesting. Personally, for me, I have a stated goal that I will win the World Championships of Ironman next year in October. Now I'm looking for very small gains because I'm at a pretty high level of fitness. But I also wish to win the World Championships of Ironman in my age group in 2050, which has never been done before, because I will be 87 years old. So I am looking at this longevity piece around my health and wellness. And what you're talking about is very interesting. So I need to be extremely careful with my insulin sensitivity going forward. And I'm going to use Ultrahuman, I think, to ensure that I have the right data on which to act.
That's another way to think about it. So 2.5 years ago, when we started pretty much with athletes. And one interesting trend that we observed was that athletes were actually giving it away to their families, their parents, their siblings, their cousins. And we were like, okay, why would you give it to them? I was like, no, it's good awareness, because I want to tell them that the amount of sugar that they are eating and the amount of glucose that they're spiking, thinking that it is normal, even with eating home food, because generally there was a perception in India that eating home food is healthy, whatever you eat, which is not true. Like, I mean, you wouldn't have 200 million people who are pre-diabetic or diabetic. They're not eating outside food. They're also eating home food, right? And athletes started giving it to their families. And we found that really interesting, because somebody said like, oh, my mother had osteoarthritis and used to have these like issues around movement, and it would come and go in waves. Pain would come and go in waves. But with better glucose control, we have seen much better recovery, even compared to like 10 years of medication. And when this was given to a doctor, the doctor said, yeah, it makes sense. Obviously, it is a metabolic disorder. It does make sense. But there was no way to continuously measure glucose or to build the system before this. The other example was, I think, even in young individuals, super young individuals who are non-athletes, we start seeing a lot of, like you can say, awareness around the breakfast cereals being like, I mean, I can go hours and hours talking about it. It's they're marketed as health food, but then if a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old is getting a glucose spike to 200 plus, and on a roadmap to diabetes, we are actually like sort of like doing disservice to the entire population. So that was another eye-opening moment. I think the third one for women specifically, what we start seeing was that because these are metabolic disorders, any sort of hormonal imbalance, cycle mismatch, etc., leads to glucose dysfunction, which is the closest way to see this is during cycles. During your menstrual period, essentially, you would see that in some ways the glucose response is much poorer. So the same food you eat before the menstrual period and during the menstrual period, it's going to give you like totally different response, like over to the extent of like 2 to 3x poorer. And this is quite normal. Like, this is not bad. This is how your body actually functions, because insulin sensitivity reduces when you're actually menstruating, which is fine. So women have to be careful when they're actually menstruating, and they have to invest in more healthy food, more high fiber, high fat, essentially moderate protein type of diet.
But we all crave chocolate during that time. It's a thing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, but it's cocoa that you crave or sugar that you crave. That's one thing to think about. But yeah, I think the reality is it's an awareness thing. So yes, I think it's sort of when you see this data, you understand that how my body actually recovers and becomes better over time. I think some people make slight changes. So I think the reality is that it's not about drastic changes. It's not about giving up sugar. It's about balancing sugar out or glucose out in your diet profile.
Now sit whenever we eat anything, we both get our phones out and we watch for the spike, and we say, David says, we're gonna let's have an event and we'll get some ice cream out. It's absolutely fascinating. But what would make me continue if I do, I think, how do you sell this in a 1 month, 3 month? How is this sold?
Once we have the insights, basically, what would make us continue to use Ultrahuman going forward for the next 20 years?
Absolutely. So the base of this is that your body is changing, your lifestyle is changing. Like think of it like this: that the day you sleep every day, the way you sleep every day, is not the same. Why is it not the same? Because your work requirements, your hydration levels, your stress levels, your previous day's sleep levels, your last few days sleep levels, your food that you're eating, all of these determine what's going to be your sleep performance the next day. Similarly, your metabolic performance is very, very dynamic. For example, uh, if you're in summer in Abu Dhabi, the same foods would actually behave much differently to you compared in winter. You know why? Just thermogenesis of your body, right? So and what I've also noticed, let's say if I talk about myself, is that um, I want to be more regular and disciplined about what I eat. But then there is also travel in life. There's also work in life. There's also changing levels of stress in life. And if I'm a little bit sick, my glucose response is thrown essentially off chart essentially, right? Or if I'm dehydrated, it is also imbalanced. If I'm traveling and I actually, so other thing is if I ate something poor in the morning, the glucose spike in the morning actually is the most important one, because once you have an insulin spike because of a glucose spike in the morning, the body generally becomes more insulin resistant for the entire day. So the first meal, because of this definition, actually becomes the most important meal, because it sets the tone or the energy level for the entire day.
Are you also suggesting then that we should fast in the morning for a little bit longer so that we don't incur an insulin spike? I mean, I've been using intermittent fasting or eating windows for several years now, and normally eat around midday, even though I train in the mornings fasting. Yeah. And at the moment, my app is telling me that when I remain fasted, my insulin level, my glucose levels are pretty well flat, 7% or so variation. So it's kind of telling me if I want to keep my insulin, my glucose flat, don't eat. But of course, I do need fuel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The best way to think about this is that this is extremely variable per individual. Like, for example, my wife, uh, if she doesn't have breakfast, her glucose levels would start trending downwards by around noon. And it becomes, I mean, she starts feeling like, oh, a little bit lethargy, a little bit jittery. And it stays at like in the 60s range for some time, and that then starts rising. But then this phase of 4 or 5 hours where there is a little bit of brain fog and lack of productivity was not tolerable. So she made this change that, oh, I will have an early breakfast. I'll like eat at 8 a.m. every day. And she used to fast earlier, like start somewhere around noon. And she made this change. Another athlete that we were working with used to skip dinners basically because the athlete was cutting weight and in that season, and realized that if they skip dinner, the problem is that their glucose levels become too low during their sleep. So what the person did essentially was that they had a little bit of complex carbs for their last meal, which is 5 p.m. Um, and that actually helped them maintain like a much better glucose levels during their sleep. So I think it's very much personalized to what you want to derive, where you want to be cognitively active, and what are your performance goals. So if I start working out in the evenings, I do need to eat a little bit of carbs, I feel, because I also function like a glucose machine. Like essentially whatever glucose comes in gets out of my body very, very fast. So if I don't take in glucose, it just makes me like inefficient. Uh, so I think some people behave, I mean, it's also because of their glycogen storage. Like we have very different glycogen storage systems. It's human adaptation. It's like we have, in sleep, you have these different type of people like who sleep differently.
Yes.
Yeah, these are called chronotypes. So people like I would need a different sleep profile than you.
Night owls,
And
morning larks, etc. Yes.
absolutely right. So there is something you can potentially figure out a glucotype as well, because I store fuel differently compared to you. I would behave very, very differently in a famine versus an athletic event compared to you. So all of these are bio individualities, basically.
Now, what intrigues me is you have a product that is based around glucose in the blood. I also, as an athlete, I will use HRV as a biomarker, heart rate variability as a biomarker. I would love these things to be combined. At the moment, this is a Garmin watch, for instance, that happens to be modern enough to do HRV and gives you some data around how well rested you are, how ready you are to train, etc. I'd love to know if there's any plans within Ultrahuman, because Ultrahuman sounds like a whole product, to combine these things in the future.
So the roadmap is pretty much to own as much of the hardware and biomarker stack as possible. In fact, recently, in the month of July this year, we released our own wearable, which looks like, if you've seen the Aura ring, it pretty much looks like a ring. This is the Ultrahuman ring. So the ring, essentially, one of the reasons why we launched the ring was because previously I couldn't do things like, how did food affect my recovery? That was an unknown, right? Because food does affect a lot of your recovery. If we just say that working out and sleeping are the only two things, along with hydration, that affect your recovery, that's almost 40% of the picture. 60% is still the food that you actually eat. We launched the ring in July this year. We have been able to integrate these two factors in a much more holistic way, apart from adding more and more biomarkers on top of it as well. Like, for example, now we have been experimenting a lot with respiratory rate to understand, that glucose and respiration work very, very closely. Like, essentially lower levels of respiration, poorer respiration quality essentially also leads to glucose dysfunction. There is another biomarker that we're working on right now. The best way to understand this is, if you have pets, the pets would sigh every few minutes. Like, they'll do a right like this. We also do it, of course, right? We sigh. You can say in subconscious way, and this phenomena of sighing is actually not just it's not just psychological, it's also physiological. What it also means is that it solves a huge biological problem for us, which is the alveoli in the lung. They need to decompress essentially, and this is what happens when you actually sigh.
Sighing or yawning?
Sighing. This is not yawning.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
yawning is totally different phenomenon. Yeah,
yawning has also got a biological purpose, surely.
absolutely. Yes, it is actually much lesser studied, and it is very, very interesting. But sighing actually got studied much earlier because of in 1972, when there was a polio epidemic, the doctors started noticing that the folks who had polio, because polio leads to lung dysfunction, they were not sighing at all. There was zero sighs. They were never able to sigh, and hence sighing became like a marker of lung health, essentially. But nobody
You
understood.
sigh a lot at me, darling. You're obviously very healthy.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also, by the way, it's also psychological. The people who sigh a lot generally tend out to be more relaxed in nature as well. But then there's a balance to it. If you are on the far right spectrum of sighing, like if you sigh a lot more, that is also a problem. It's a totally different type of disorder. And on the left side also, it's a problem. So there's a balance, just like HRV, there's a balance that's
I've
required
always
here.
wanted to be extraordinary. You're telling me actually it's probably dangerous to be extraordinary in any way, because you're probably storing up some sort of a dysfunction in the future.
Universe cares about balance. So that is true.
How people find this product, where they get it from, how often is it an annual thing, a 6-month thing? How are you selling it?
Sure, it's there are 3-month plans, 6-month plans, and 1-year plans for the product. Generally, what I would recommend is that 3 months is good enough time to understand how your body functions. And if you want to make changes in your body, then it's a 6-month or a 12-month plan. But you should only take the longer term plan when you're actually committed to make a change, because it's just data otherwise, right?
It's action that we want from the data.
Absolutely. So when I'm ready to commit that, okay, 2023 is the year when I want to make real change in my life, only then I should go for a longer one. Otherwise, I can just experiment for 3 months and see what happens.
This is virtually the best weapon against type 2 diabetes, because it is so immediate and so obvious when you do something that isn't in tune with your body.
No, absolutely. So I keep giving this analogy that, let's say there are two people going to a fight, and one of them is trained, right? I'm trained in glucose and somebody else is not, right? So I obviously, like, I'll have a much better chance of survival. And the enemy that we are fighting is diabetes in this case. So I know what a glucose dysfunction looks like. I know which foods to avoid. I know which foods can be metabolized really well with exercise. So I think it's much more degrees of freedom away compared to somebody who doesn't understand this entire world.
At the moment, it's only available in India and UAE.
Yeah, we are live in India and UAE. We should be launching the rest of GCC very, very soon, which is the Saudi Arabia market and Bahrain and other markets as well.
And you're going to hit UK and USA at some point?
US should be first compared to UK in our list. We are aiming for the quarter two of 2023 for US launch.
Tremendous. Congratulations. What about South America? I'm asking for Caroline because a lot of her followership is based in South America. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Sure. So I think given this is a global platform, we don't need to localize as much. But I think for South America, we might need to localize with Spanish and a little bit of I think local cuisine and all of that stuff.
Yes.
For the MENA region, for example, we are looking at the Arabic version of the app. So
Tremendous.
the Spanish version should be somewhere around next year. So we definitely believe in the power of localization, because it has to have that connect with the insights have to have a connect with you, right? That's really, really important. So
Right.
I think 2023 is the year where we will do both the markets, the US market, the Latin American market, and also, of
UK.
course, sorry,
And UK.
UK. Yes, I mean, it's an interesting market. I've spent some time in the market as well. I think eventually, of course, yes. But if you give us a reason to get there faster, of course, we would love to.
Well, I do know that there are an awful lot of obese people in the UK and an awful lot of obese people in the Americas, obviously. So if it's worth doing here, it's worth doing there at some point. And you own this market, I think, the non-medical market. Although I note that the actual sensor is a Libra free, which is a pretty standard sensor used by the medical, the clinical side as well.
It's an FDA approved, highly robust sensor. So it is very, very easy to use. It is very, very, like, there's no risk around using the sensor. So I think.
So could you just go back to the how it all happens? They go onto your website, sign up for 3 months, and they get a box from you, a beautiful box, I have to say, lovely packaging, with the Libra
free,
the
the actual sensor that's underneath this wonderful, well-branded patch.
Right. No, absolutely. So the process is that you either buy a 3 or 6 month, you get a box every month. You can all get it shipped together as well. That's also an option in case you're traveling, so we can pre-ship it to you. And it comes with a protective patch and the sensors. You apply the sensor, you apply the patch on top, which basically makes it extremely friendly for swimming.
I've been hugely impressed.
David exercises.
This is the first one. It's nearly 2 weeks of being on there, and it hasn't moved at all, or no problem at all.
Yeah, these are extremely well, like you can say, these are tested for hyperallergenic properties and as well as for flexibility and all of that. So I think these should like withstand almost everything. Where I think one exception probably could be like contact sports, where essentially, so I do a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, so I have to be a little more careful. So I do a lot more gi jiu-jitsu than non-gi, than no gi. So it's much easier that ways. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Adding food, that is what I'm doing really well. I just like to point out there.
Wow.
Do you want to point out how well you're doing?
I had breakfast.
Oh, that's nice. Very cool.
It's such a competition in our house.
I'm afraid, yeah, Caroline constantly winning. She's
Um,
much better at controlling her
It's like
sugars.
top trumps, if you've ever played top trumps. Adding food, which you have an option to do, sleep, whatever you want to add, it gives you the options. If you add a food, does that add, do I add to your bank of foods?
Of data.
Or only a bank of data, or is it just mine?
Today it doesn't add to the bank because you're selecting from the either selecting from the list already, but your foods don't really get added to the bank overall. So it's maintained per user, sort of like as a data privacy thing right now. But eventually what we will be doing is, I think we'd want to make this more crowdsourced so that people actually can contribute to food repositories, because food choices with regions would actually become very, very unique as we go along.
But Costa is universal.
Yeah,
Costa
of course.
coffee is universal.
Of course. Costa
So
coffee
I
is
was just
universal.
asking if I added it, whether it would help.
We can do it specifically. Yes.
Yeah, a tremendous product. Mohit, congratulations. We're enjoying it. We think it's of great value. And we'd love to do this again, perhaps in a couple of months' time, when we've got all our data and have started to make active changes. Because at the moment we're still collecting.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not acting on what I'm seeing particularly consistently yet, but I shall. And you also offer expert help to people like us who can go onto the website or onto the app and ask for expert help. And you have nutritionists, cardiologists, all sorts of people that can help us.
We have performance coaches who are sports scientists and NSCA certified folks who would actually understand glucose more from a performance perspective, because performance is a totally new spectrum compared to, let's say, dysfunction. Dysfunction is very well studied, but performance is a little fuzzy, which is essentially performance for you might be physical performance coupled with cognitive performance during a game match. For me, it might be something else. So it needs to be highly customized. So that's why we have sports scientists.
I just want to remind everybody that this product is not only for athletes, though. It is for anybody who wants to live a longer, healthier life.
Yeah, absolutely. And because glucose, proper functioning of glucose is relevant for everybody. Everybody wants to live a life where they feel energetic. They want to like basically have the body composition that they want. So I think this is definitely for everybody. Of course, athletes can use it differently and compared to, let's say, for general everyday use case. But then almost everybody wants to live healthy. Everybody wants to live healthy and a great life. So I think this is hence for everybody.
Rohit, thank you so much for explaining it, and congratulations on your product. We are completely sold. I'm particularly as I'm winning.
Again.
I'm very happy.
Yes, we've gamified it within our family, and that's another way that you might want to go in the future, because of course that's how the world ticks. People love competition.
No, absolutely. Anyway. And this is the right kind, I think. Yeah.
Mohit, thank you. And let's reconnect in the future.